Hi, I'm Jodie Sweetin, and welcome to Season 4 of Awkward Conversations. Each week, we provide parents with practical advice on raising happy, healthy, substance-free kids. This season, we're going to cover a wide range of topics with a strong emphasis on giving our kids the tools to build resilience, confidence, and skills that empower them to make smart choices, even when you're not there. We'll bring you expert guests with valuable insights and celebrity parents who will share their experience and learn from our guests alongside us. Some core principles you'll hear repeatedly. Building a bond is the most powerful tool because if you don't know what's normal for your child, you won't know when it's not. And it's not one 60-minute conversation, but more like 61-minute conversations over time. And the only wrong conversation is the one that you don't have with your kids. So put on your parenting cap and join us over the next 20 weeks as we cover topics like building resilience, prevention through creative expression, substance use in LGBTQ+ youth, the influence of influencers, body image, cross-cultural perspectives, and many more. Remember, as a parent, you do not need to be perfect, but you do need to be present. And I'm also thrilled to once again be joined by my co-host, Amy McCarthy, who is the Senior Clinical Social Worker from Harvard's Boston Children's Hospital.
Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure
Thank you so much for having me back. And it's such an honor to be able to talk about this topic.
And I'd like to introduce Rich Lucy, who is the Senior Prevention Program Manager with DEA's Community Outreach and Prevention Support Section, who, along with the Elks Drug Awareness Program, are the funding partners of the show. Plus, Rich is the main consultant for our show, so when our EP Bob doesn't know or understand something, which is frankly a lot of the time, just kidding, love you, Bob, he goes to Rich. But hi, Rich. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Jodie, and hi, Amy. Let me start off first, right off the bat. Let me thank both of you for your time and your effort in continuing to contribute to this. I know this season's going to be great. We got a lot of hot topics to talk about the whole season. So glad to have you both on board again.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
We are also excited to welcome back to the show Joe Bazenko, Senior Research Chemist with the DEA's Special Testing and Research Laboratory and a Scientific Advisor to the DEA's Special Operations Division. Hi, Joe.
Hey, good afternoon, Amy. I appreciate you both for bringing science to the forefront to this question.
Well, we are so happy to be doing another season of Awkward Conversations. We've had so many great talks and topics come up in the past seasons. But, you know, one thing that we try not to do on Awkward Conversations is fearmonger. But, you know, some things are just really scary. And our first subject this season, there's no other way of really saying it, is pretty terrifying. In 2023, the DEA seized more than 381 million lethal doses of fentanyl, enough to kill every American. But as a parent, what keeps me awake is that despite these significant seizures, a substantial amount of fentanyl still reaches these streets. And more of the deaths that we're seeing are not just habitual drug users, but rather accidental poisoning in young adults, teenagers, and even small children.
Yeah, I think it was just a few months ago that a 1-year-old died at his daycare center and 3 other kids were hospitalized because of fentanyl exposure.
Yeah, it's really, really scary. And, you know, we don't like to fearmonger or blow things out of proportion. We like to have very real, honest conversations here on this show. And this is as honest as it gets.
It doesn't get much more honest.
Is that fentanyl is ravaging our country. I would love to throw this question to Rich. Can you give us just kind of an overview of the current state of the fentanyl crisis in the U.S. and how it's evolved over the past year from our last show?
Yeah, absolutely. And you really did hit the nail on the head. Even here at DEA, we're not in the business of trying to terrify people. But the issues around fake pills and illicit fentanyl are just plain scary. And, you know, we're going to get into all the intricacies of it throughout the podcast. But since we were on the podcast last year, just in the sheer volume of the pills that DEA has seized, it was 80 million and 12,000 pounds of fentanyl powder. And, you know, Jodie, you had said it, that's 381 million lethal doses. That's enough to kill every American. And so, you know, we're doing our best to get this off the streets, you know, these drugs out of our schools and communities. But the other part of that is education and awareness, and that's what we hope to do today.
Absolutely. I know that there's been a huge uptick in the amount of pills that are laced with fentanyl now. I mean, I believe it's something like 7 out of 10, which is up from 6 out of 10 last year. And I think when we started this show, it was something around like 4 out of 10. That's almost double. I know there's new forms of fentanyl too that are emerging, and are there any particularly alarming trends that you're seeing, or what are just the overall trends that you're seeing in terms of what pills are consisting of?
The one thing we can count on consistently that we see great evidence for is the amount of pills we're seeing in the labs and the concentration of fentanyl that is loaded into those tablets or that is mixed in with those powders. If it's one thing we see, it's just a constant increase in the amount, not only in volume, but in the concentration. So that's sobering in and of itself if you want to think about what we talked about last season and how dangerous fentanyl was and the pervasiveness through different types of drug exhibits in different forms. We're seeing more of it this year represented in our analysis. And again, it's the analysis done by an entire laboratory system. So that is not just analyzing a few samples, but that's over the course of many thousands of samples. So the new forms we're seeing, I want to make it clear. Fentanyl, yes, is very much the topic we're here to discuss today, but it is by far and away not the only, synthetic opioid that has a tremendous potency associated with. We've got an entire class that we maybe just touched on last year, referred to the nitazines. But in addition to those, we see fluorofentanyl, as well as we're actually seeing an uptick in carfentanyl. And I don't know if we discussed that last year.
We did a little bit, but please explain all of the different kinds.
So there are different forms that we're seeing out there. So not only the physical forms, but we're actually seeing entire different class of drugs really start to take off. And that would be the nitazines. So if we think about one group of drugs, that would be fentanyl and the fentanyl-related substances. And we're going to talk about that more in a moment. But we're also seeing nitazines, and nitazines are also powerful opioids as well. It's not just fentanyl that we need to be concerned about or keep an eye out or to get the message about, but it's these nitazines. And right now, I think DEA is tracking through analysis of 15 to 16 different types of nitazines. And then there's an entire class of U drugs, which begin with U47700, U48800, are another class. So the broad picture I want to share with everyone there is, although fentanyl gets a lot of the airtime, gets a lot of the print and a lot of the clicks, it's not just fentanyl we need to be concerned about. Now, back to fentanyl, to delve a little deeper into that, we're finding fluorofentanyl, which is a modification of the fentanyl molecule. But the really, really scary part here lately is we're seeing reports and an uptick of carfentanyl, an exceedingly dangerous drug, so dangerous that while it has veterinary applications for large terrestrial animals such as bull elephants and moose and whatnot, there's no legitimate application for humans because it is so incredibly powerful. It registers an approximate potency of around 10,000 times that of morphine. So that right there, an amount that is considered fatal for carfentanyl, is not visible with the unaided eye. Whereas fentanyl, and I'm sure we're going to see an image of this, to where the amount that could lead to a fatal overdose of fentanyl, you could easily visualize on the tip of a pencil lead. Not so for carfentanyl.
Now, I'm sure that a lot of parents out there have these questions. Why do we keep seeing it, like just growth in these offshoots of fentanyl and now nitazines and, carfentanyl and such?
Well, I will tell you this. We know for a fact that modifications or manipulations to a drug to make one of these, if you will, related drugs is meant to evade regulation or control status. So when the inspiration, you would think, in the licit side of chemistry is to find a drug that might have better properties, what goes on in the clandestine or illicit nature isn't based on altruism. It's not based on anything other than just sheer greed. And if you recall last year, we talked about the 3 Ps. The higher potency brings higher profit, and that profit brings peril. And that's exactly why we're seeing this and why it's not really a surprise that not only do we find fentanyl-related substances, but we find entire classes such as the nitazines, such as the U drugs, drugs that have been around for many years only in the literature because it never really made its way to market. But those two classes of drugs were resurrected, if you will, for the potency properties, for the profit that's going to bring to it, and the peril that we see associated with the deaths. So there are a great many different types of drugs out there that would fit this same category that we haven't discussed, that we haven't found in the labs. Now, that being said, we have an entire list of powders at the Special Testing and Research Laboratory to which we don't know what they are. they don't register on any of our instruments as a known drug substance. So we have to go through entire special regimens and experiments through very smart men and women to identify what that drug even is. And if there's a sobering fact I'm going to share with you today, there are times when the scientists really have to identify, like entire research projects, to identify these new substances that we're hinting about today.
People are taking them unsuspectingly and have no idea, and scientists
Don't
tell
even
what
know.
they are.
What we know in prevention, one of the best first steps is education and raise awareness. And DEA issued a public safety alert back in September of 2021 when the whole availability of fentanyl became that much more known, and the lethality of it, thanks to the work of Joe and the chemists and all the folks working in our labs, basically educating us about what they were seeing. So we launched One Pill Can Kill, the awareness campaign, almost now 3 years ago, September of 2021. And really the whole purpose behind that awareness campaign was to raise awareness along a whole number of different demographics: youth, young adults, those in college, those in the military, those in the workplace. We wanted to reach parents, other caregivers, educators, whether in K-12, whether they're in the higher education space, educate employers, because we wanted them to be able to be equipped to talk with their employees about this issue. I'll tell you about a couple of different unique prevention efforts we've had. Earlier this year, DEA had teamed up with NFL Alumni Health, and it was the week leading up to the Super Bowl. And it was our number 3 guy here at DEA, Associate Administrator John Delina. And, I know, Jodie, you know this, being in the theater and film community, he was on Radio Row, basically. And it was just interview after interview after interview after interview with all these different media markets talking about this campaign, the dangers around fake pills and illicit fentanyl. Why? So we could reach as many different populations and cities about this very issue. I'm surprised, even when I go out and speak at conferences and staffing our exhibit, I'm surprised about the number of people who still don't know about fake pills and fentanyl. So it's, our job and the job of other DEA staff around the country going out and doing these presentations. Now into the esports community, which, not a gamer myself, but I'm telling you, having been now part of this particular project, this is, very popular in probably the middle and upper high school areas, but also on college campuses with college students. And so this was a new space for us, but we wanted to meet them where they're at, go where they are. And so through these online tournaments, we have found an opportunity to talk about this issue and reach that audience as well. So again, education, raising awareness, it's the hallmark of prevention.
And it sounds like a lot of community outreach and working with, finding where young people or people that are affected by this or who need to be educated. I have, my daughters are 16 and 13, and this is something that we talk about often and are faced with. Many young people these days know someone who has been affected by this or who has had an accidental overdose and died. My kids know several people, either acquaintances or actual friends. And I think that sobering reality is hitting a lot of young people in ways that, it's unfortunate that it has to take that in order to make it real for them. But, education like this is so important. And that's one thing that I love that we do on the show, is that we always have real conversations. Look, we know what young people are doing. We know young people are experimenting, but we need to educate them about the dangers of what is out there right now, because it's just not like it used to be. It's just the landscape of experimenting, the landscape of growing up and making, foolish mistakes that maybe you learn from. I feel like the lane is getting much, much narrower because oftentimes you don't have another chance.
It's one pill can kill, and unfortunately we know one pill has killed.
Yes.
In many situations, and I think, just continuing to, speak of the reality of that is so important.
I spoke to 2 different schools in the last 2 weeks. One was a high school And it was not a terrible surprise that many of the kids there had heard of fentanyl, because they do reach out to schools through Rich's community outreach program. The following week, I went to an elementary school. Right off the bat, it asked, "Who has heard of fentanyl?" Half the hands went up in that class.
No, it's younger and younger kids are learning about it, being affected by it. It's shocking to have to think that we have to speak to kids that young about this now, but it's their older siblings or their parents or the medicine cabinet, or it's sort of becomes so pervasive. I know rural communities in particular have been some of the hardest hit communities.
I've been in this prevention space for 30 plus years at state government and federal government level. And this really is unlike anything we've ever seen. Certainly trying to prevent underage drinking and marijuana use, and certainly cocaine and heroin and meth. But the issue around fake pills and illicit fentanyl is unlike anything we've ever seen. It's an equal opportunity destroyer. It is affecting individuals, families, and communities regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of your socioeconomic status.
Yeah.
Regardless of if you're urban, suburban, rural.
Yeah, it really is scary. And again, as a parent and being faced with this constantly, or having my kids say, hey, this person that I know, or remember this friend that I used to go to their house and hang out with? Yeah, they're gone. You're watching Awkward Conversations Season 4.
Saving lives means staying informed. Knowing the dangers of using fake prescription pills can help those you care about and keep our community safe. As a parent, educator, neighbor, or friend, we all play a role in building safe and healthy futures for ourselves and our loved ones. Do your part to take the first step today. Visit GetSmartAboutDrugs.com to access education, prevention, and treatment resources. Fake prescription pills laced with fentanyl are deadly. Be their protector. Be informed. Visit GetSmartAboutDrugs.com.
Welcome back to Awkward Conversations Season 4. What have you seen in the role that technology is playing in sort of pushing this crisis forward because of the ease with which you can now get pills or online or prescriptions or, wherever. And we're even seeing it in, pharmacies in border towns, things like that, where legitimate, what you would think would be a legitimate pharmacy, everything has been cut with fentanyl.
We're seeing an increasing use of social media and apps and use of emojis, and made this so much easier. So it doesn't have to be someone you've laid eyes on before, but rather it's just a quick connection, or it's online sales. And that's something we're competing with as what Rich and community outreach is doing. It's just as strong of an outreach.
So it's interesting, Joe, we talk about technology and we think about, I go to like social media. So there's like two sides of social media. We're also using X and Insta and Facebook, and we're out there on those platforms trying to also educate, again, raise awareness, because it's a hallmark. But by the same token, this is where now people are seeking out to buy these drugs. I mean, if you think about the stereotypical dark alley, and that was where people used to, drug transactions. And that's not to say that doesn't occur. But, we talk about now the internet being the new superhighway of drug trafficking.
We discuss that a lot on this show, sort of the double-edged sword of social media, that it can be an incredible educator. It can bring people together. It can make people who may be feeling lonely connect with others who share the same things. And it can also make loneliness worse and make addiction worse. The thing we talk about often is monitoring what your kids are doing online, not giving them, total freedom and using the opportunity to have discussions as things come up, as you see things on the internet, as you're watching a movie, and be like, oh my gosh, have you ever seen somebody do that?
But it makes perfect sense, because that's where people are finding substances and having these transactions, to then also make sure that the information and the prevention and, all of those tools are also available in those same places. So maybe your algorithm starts hopefully crisscrossing, and you get kind of exposed to all of the good information to help people make good decisions. So I think that's where we can use technology, websites like Just Think Twice for kids, or GetSmartAboutDrugs.com for parents, where they can go and find, all of this information we're talking about and more available to them. We're going to have those links in the show notes so folks can check it out.
Glad you brought those up. So the one-stop shop that I would point people to is dea.gov/onepill. First of all, that's where you can get all of the information that we have available, free in digital format to download. I point people to the Partners Toolbox. There we have 3 different fact sheets. The general fact sheet about fake pills. We have one that's specifically on what parents and caregivers should know and need to know about fake pills. And then Joe referenced, the emoji codes. There's a whole now emoji language that people are using. And, I sort of say facetiously, but in all genuineness, it's sort of like the street slang for drugs. It's constantly evolving. That's the one-stop shop. But I also want to give a plug to the other 4 very quickly public-facing websites that we have that are prevention related. And Amy, you mentioned a couple of them. So justthinktwice.com, we have information there for teens, a whole range of issues, but specifically also around fake pills. GetSmartAboutDrugs.com, that is the website specifically for parents and educators. CampusDrugPrevention.gov, it's for the professionals who are working to prevent drug use and misuse among college students. And lastly, OperationPrevention.com, which is our collaborative effort with Discovery Education, started out specifically around lessons plans in high school around opioids, but now it's expanded and it's all drugs. And we have a specific module just around fake pills and illicit fentanyl. So there are plenty of online resources that we at DEA have for different demographics, different folks to go. But the one-stop shop, again, I want to point people to dea.gov/onepill and go to the Partners Toolbox.
These are phenomenal tools for parents. We're so glad that you're sharing them with us. And again, all of those websites and that information can be found in our show notes all together. I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about Naloxone and about fentanyl test strips, kind of some potential harm reduction strategies people might be hearing about.
You need to know that there are test strips available for many drugs. Now, a lot of times, many of these test strips were designed to test for urine, but they can be adapted. Although those can be sensitive, and they can detect a broad range of fentanyl substances. It's the questions that it doesn't ask and that folks aren't expecting an answer for are really a problem. So I'll take an example. When we talk about the pills and testing them, let me just make it clear. I can't visually discern a fake pill from a real pill. So something that might come from a pharmacy versus something that might come from an illicit clandestine laboratory. I've been doing this for 25 years. I have to go in and do the analysis. So, and these are the scientists. I'm not the only one that make that claim. So to say you can visually discern one pill from another. So these test strips come in and folks will say, well, I'm going to use a test strip to see if the pill that I have actually has something bad in it. Unfortunately, it's the things that the test strip doesn't tell you, that doesn't ask the question, that makes it a real danger, that can lead you with a false sense of security. Or as an example, if I have one pill and I want to test it, I'm going to break off a portion of that pill. I'm going to put it in the water and I'm going to test with the strip. Well, if you got a negative with that test strip, it doesn't tell you that there wasn't a nitazene in there. Some of the nitazines are more potent than fentanyl. And it also doesn't say that there's quality control in that tablet. We see tablets that have near negligible amounts of fentanyl and tablets that have enough to kill 4 adults. And it's not mixed evenly through the tablet. So we do not have the way to test that entire tablet and have confidence that that test strip, 1, applies to the drug that's in there, and 2, that we don't have an amount that's in that portion of the tablet or in that small bit of powder that you test. So these test strips, they can be useful, but in a very narrow sense. And it's the questions that it doesn't answer that should really make folks consider or reconsider what these fake pills and powders have in them.
And can really give people a false sense of security because they think, oh, but I did my due diligence and you still will have no idea what's actually in the pill. I think that's a really great topic that you brought up, that the nitazines don't show up and can kill you.
One friend takes half a pill and one friend takes the other half, and one can have a fentanyl overdose and the other one does not, because it's only in certain parts of the pill. So I think it's really important for people to be aware of that.
So I'd love to talk a lot more about naloxone with you, Joe, and get some of the the science behind it, but also the availability of it, where people can get it, and why they should have it on hand.
It was within maybe a 4-day period here in the small town of maybe 15,000 that I live in, encountered 2 people that overdosed right in front of me. folks that had perhaps maybe taken a pill or maybe taking the drug another way, and they just dropped. And every person should have on them because of that. And these weren't obvious places. One time I was getting my hair cut. Another time I was just walking into a restaurant. Time when you say, boy, nothing makes me feel worse than something I could have done to maybe save a life, and something so inconsequential to carry, such as naloxone, right?
It is available over the counter at most pharmacies now, correct? I know a lot of, I don't know about in all states, but I do know at least in California here, you can get Narcan at your pharmacy. You go to the pharmacist and ask for it, and you can purchase it just to have it. It does not require a prescription or anything.
Same in Massachusetts. And for folks who are at home, being able to look up, there are often free distribution sites.
And community centers will have available doses of Narcan.
I do think, just for folks at home who maybe not have heard of naloxone or Narcan, what we're talking about here is basically, and Joe, you probably could put this into better scientific words, but it's a reversal medication essentially. When somebody is in an active state of overdose from an opioid, that it will actively reverse the kind of act that in their body and in their system. So it's a critical thing, I think. When I think about people having access to defibrillators in public spaces, when they have access to knowing CPR, these are public health interventions that we all can play a role in saving lives.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way of putting it.
Rich, we're so appreciative of you being here today. Is there any final advice that you'd like to give families and listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, we continue to encourage open conversations. Don't shy away from, I go back to the title of this whole podcast series. Yeah, it might be an awkward conversation. We'll try to normalize these conversations. So having that open and honest conversation with children about the dangers of drugs. But I want to point out a couple more resources for parents where they can go online to help educate themselves so they can have these conversations. So GetSmartAboutDrugs.com. We talked about that. It's specifically for parents and educators. There's an article on that website called Buying Drugs Online, What You Should Know and How to Protect Your Kids. So there's specifically that we'd like to have parents check out. But also we have a publication that we produce with our federal partners at the U.S. Department of Education called Growing Up Drug Free. It's a parent's guide to substance use prevention. And throughout the guide, we provide tips for parents and other caregivers on how to talk with their children from preschool right on up through college. And yeah, preschool is not too early to be talking about good medicine versus bad medicine, on their terms. The conversation shifts and it evolves as the children get older. But that guide is such a great publication to give parents the tips that they need to have these awkward conversations. So I definitely want to point out those two, specific resources: Growing Up Drug Free and Buying Drugs Online, which is an article on GetSmartAboutDrugs.com. And I know you're going to have both those links in the show notes, and people will be able to easily find them. I'm not a parent myself, but I'm an uncle, right? And so I talk to my nieces and my nephew, coaches of athletic teams, religious leaders, neighbors. We all come in contact with youth and young adults, and we can all have these conversations. So I want to just continue encouraging to have the open conversations, because if we don't, unfortunately, we know that there are some serious and sometimes deadly consequences.
So, Rich, when you're talking to your nieces and your nephews and family members, what is the one thing that you absolutely make sure to tell them?
Yeah, so here's the universal message, no matter who you're talking to, elementary school, right on up through college and beyond. This is the universal message for everyone. Never take a pill that hasn't been prescribed for you through a licensed medical provider and dispensed through a trusted pharmacy. And I'm sorry, I will tell you, social media sites are not trusted pharmacies. Right. So earlier, Jodie, you mentioned experimentation, and we know that happens, but taking a pill that you don't know where it came from, and if it came from your friend, you still don't know where the pill came from, right? That kind of experimentation is just not worth it at this point, because we know of the consequences. So that's the universal message. Never take a pill that hasn't been prescribed for you through a licensed medical provider and dispensed through a trusted pharmacy.
Well, Joe, thank you so much for joining us again. Are there any last thoughts that you would like to leave our audience with?
Absolutely. There's true unknowns being derived and discovered every day. That right there, I think, should be sobering fact. And the fact that the men and women that work with this nonstop can't tell the fake pills, discern them visually from a real pill. And I think that right there should give you the ground truth of the folks that work with it, see it, and analyze it every day.
Great.
Sage words.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we've talked so much community prevention, family prevention, conversations, ongoing education. Amy, what else can you think of that we should make sure and leave people with?
Yeah, what we want to do today is encourage parents to stay informed and proactive. So, thanks for listening in. Keep trying to find resources like our podcast with, up-to-date information. You can, organize an information fair at your child's school to get the word out further, or your church, or, other community centers. This can be something that you can encourage to be an agenda item at your child's school board, or again, other, Cub Scout meeting, any place that you and your child kind of, spend time. So you can certainly see if your community has a drug, free coalition or a substance-free coalition. Most and many do. If you're looking to figure out if you have one in your community, you can go to cadca.org, and we'll put that in the show notes so you can click that easily. Our local DEA offices often have a prevention specialist or other informational tools, and so would certainly want to encourage folks to reach out to those local field offices as well and get their information, from a Google search or from the internet too.
Well, thank you so much, Amy. Always a pleasure to have these conversations. Rich, Joe, thank you so much for joining us today, Joe. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us on. Thank you for bringing science to the forefront. Sharing the science is a passion, but I also think it's a great place to start when you're having an awkward conversation.
Once again, Jodie, Amy, I just, on behalf of DEA and all of us here, want to thank you again for your commitment to this issue, your continued work on this project, your help to get the word out on this and all the other topics that we're going to talk about this season. It really means a lot to us, and we really do appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for giving us this opportunity for the last 4 seasons. It's been really important for all of us and for everyone who's gotten to watch. So thank you.
Sure thing.
As we close this episode of Awkward Conversations, it's essential to remember that behind every statistic lies a human story, and the fentanyl crisis is not just numbers, it's people. It's affecting real families with real pain and real loss. This epidemic reaches beyond the typical drug user, destroying lives in unexpected and heartbreaking ways. So next week, we will be seeing the faces behind the crisis, the stories of love, loss, and the tireless fight for awareness and change from family members who have been affected by the fentanyl and opioid crisis. So stay informed, stay vigilant, and let's work together to protect our children. Now, here's a preview of next week's episode, The Faces of Fentanyl.
So in 2018, I lost my daughter Ashley to fentanyl poisoning. And through this process, we learned about fentanyl. That was the first day that I had ever heard the name fentanyl.
Today, we will look at the faces of fentanyl. We'll hear about a mother's crusade to give meaning to her devastating loss, and to 2 dedicated men on the front lines, each fighting a heroic battle in their own way.
Ashley was a 32-year-old woman. We had open discussions about drugs and alcohol, and her boyfriend gave her what looked like a prescription pill, neither of them knowing it was made with fentanyl and that it was counterfeit.
Opioid overdose deaths are quickly becoming one of the leading causes of deaths of young people. 65% of those were never diagnosed with a substance use condition.
Fentanyl, unfortunately, is just ubiquitous in our society now. Literally anyone can get their hands on it. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, if you were going to use an opioid, you probably would have used, heroin, which would involve you using a needle to inject it. But now that it's a pill, very easily could be passed out at a party, very easily could be found on the floor if you're a toddler. And we've had these occasions.
These are stories of love, loss, and the relentless fight for awareness and change. Today's conversation isn't just awkward, it's difficult and painful, but absolutely necessary.
Make sure to check out getsmartaboutdrugs.com. Parents, caregivers, you can find so many resources of great information there about how to talk to your kids and make these conversations a little less awkward. A huge thank you to the Elks DAP, which is the largest all-volunteer nationwide drug awareness program, and also a huge thanks to the DEA for their outreach program and for making this possible.
The views, information, or opinions expressed during the Awkward Conversation series are solely those of the individuals, speakers, commentators, experts, and/or hosts involved, and do not necessarily reflect nor represent those of the production, associates, or broadcaster, or any of its employees. Production is not responsible and does not verify for accuracy any of the information contained in the series available for viewing. The primary purpose of this series is to educate and inform. This series does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. This series is available for private, non-commercial use only. The production, broadcaster, or its channel cannot be held accountable for all or any views expressed during this program.